The groundskeepers at the university district had seemingly abandoned all pretense of snow removal since the new year began. How many times had Chris, the 38-year-old father, had to navigate the mounds of heavy, compacted snow just to reach the main gate where he picked up his daughter? Chloe? Finally, the familiar sight of Chloe, a tall figure wrapped in a bright blue scarf, emerged, slung across her back, digging into her shoulders, was a giant backpack swollen with heavy textbooks, a veritable siege weapon. Chris always joked. Tough day? Which was heavier today, physics or philosophy? Chris asked, holding open the dented door of his aging Chevy sedan for her. Chloe, a 19-year-old college freshman, sighed a weary relief as she settled into the passenger seat. Physics, of course. At least philosophy is comprehensible. But seriously, Dad, you're hilarious. They shared a laugh. For Chris, this grinding January schedule, his work shift ending just as her final lecture let out, usually around 7 in the evening, had become routine. His singular hope was to return as quickly as possible to their small, rented apartment, a place that smelled of warmth and peace. They drove through the city and out onto the access road. The streets were desolate, sparse. Dimly lit streetlights cast pools of faint yellow light across the icy asphalt. On either side, fields of dead, dry grass stretched out, a monotonous white expanse in winter, punctuated only by the dark, skeletal frameworks of bare trees. There were no houses here, no pedestrians, only the ribbon of asphalt where cars sped past. Chris finally relaxed, beginning to consider what he would make for dinner, when his daughter's sudden, high-pitched scream pierced the silence. Dad, brake, stop. The yell was so abrupt and jarring that Chris instinctively slammed his foot onto the brake pedal. The Chevy slid momentarily on the frozen pavement before screeching to an abrupt halt. What is it? What happened? Chloe, did you see something? Chloe's voice trembled. She was staring out the icy window at the thicket of snow-covered, twisted old trees to their right. Beyond the thicket, I thought I heard someone, a whine. A terrible sound. Chris sighed, a mixture of irritation and exhaustion. Chloe, you're tired. There's nothing out here but wind and ice. Let's go. It's freezing. No, Dad, please. She grabbed his arm. In her eyes wasn't stubbornness, but a profound, genuine anxiety. Please, let's just look. I know I heard something. Defeated by the earnest look in his daughter's eyes, Chris cut the engine. He pulled the heavy-duty flashlight from the glove compartment, wrapped his scarf tighter, and stepped out into the frigid air. The January cold instantly slapped his face, momentarily stealing his breath. Stay in the car. I'll go alone. No, I'm coming, too. Chloe was already opening her door, planting her boots in the deep snow. They waded through the drifts toward the spot Chloe had indicated, their steps heavy. The wind was particularly fierce here, carrying the faint, cold smell of gasoline and frozen earth. The flashlight beam traced the bare, gnarled branches of the thicket. Then, at the base of a particularly twisted, ancient tree, the beam caught a shape. It was a large dog, a magnificent Alaskan Malamute with thick, golden-red fur that, in autumn sunlight, would have glowed like a warm fire, was now lying exhausted on the ground. It was tethered to the tree trunk by a short, thin wire cable. The very double coat that should have been its armor against the cold was its undoing, covered in a thick, hard layer of ice. It had turned the dog into a rigid, ice-encrusted statue. Underneath the dog, a small patch of ground had been unnaturally flattened. The dog had scraped the snow away, desperately trying to keep warm by walking the perimeter allowed by the cable. But its strength had failed. It lay still, eyes tightly closed. The snow melted by its body heat had refrozen into a layer of solid ice underneath. There was nothing else nearby, no water bowl, no food bag, not even a piece of cardboard. Most chillingly, there were no recent footprints around except their own. Only old tire tracks, heading toward the tree and then backing away, were visible, almost erased by a blizzard days ago. Someone had deliberately tied it here, knowing the spot was abandoned, knowing passing cars wouldn't stop. The dog heard their footsteps. It painfully lifted its head. In the dim flashlight beam, its dark, Almond-shaped eyes glinted. Chris saw no aggression in that gaze. Only a heart-wrenching blend of hope and plea. The dog let out a faint, struggling whine and tried to stand on its hind legs, but only succeeded in shaking its whole body before collapsing again. The wire strained, digging into its neck beneath the heavy, cardboard-like fur. "Dad," Chloe sank to her knees in the snow. Tears immediately streamed down her face. "He's freezing to death. How long has he been here? Oh God, who would do this?" Chris crouched beside her, examining the dog and its paws. Based on the scraped ground and the state of the ice in the fur, he knew, at least 3 days, maybe 4. These breeds have amazing endurance, thanks to their northern genetics. But this is beyond the limit. Look, he can't move at all. He noticed a leather collar hidden beneath the thick, golden fur. He's clearly owned. This isn't stray. Chris's voice was strange, low, and cold. He's not lost. Chloe, someone drove him here, tied him up, and left him, intentionally. He carefully reached out and touched the dog's flank. The outer layer of fur was freezing and rigid, but deep within the dense undercoat, he could feel a faint tremble. The dog flinched but didn't recoil. Instead, it leaned slightly forward, as if asking, "You're not a ghost, are you? You're real." An almost silent, necessary moan, the kind that breaks a listener's heart, escaped the dog's throat. There was no anger, no wildness, only pain and a profound question of why the world was so cruel. This noble Malamute had likely never known the harshness of life on the streets. "Please," Chloe pressed her forehead against the dog's side. "We have to take him home." Chris clenched his fists. He hated injustice. He hated when someone intentionally hurt the weak. He was reminded of his own childhood, feeling abandoned and unwanted. No argument here. Chris stood up, his voice decisive. A cold resolve filled him. "Stay here with him. Don't move. I'm getting the bolt cutters from the trunk." He walked back to the car where his toolbox lay, not looking back. If the lock was old and rusted, he would cut the chain. Chloe wrapped her arms around the dog's head, burying her face in the icy, lion-like mane. "Don't be scared," she whispered. "We won't leave you. We'll be quick." The dog pressed its nose into her hand. This new breath contained a mix of relief and mortal agony. He had waited so long. The smell of gasoline and coolant hit Chris's nose as he caught his breath in the car, warming his stiff fingers while searching the dashboard for his old, rubber-coated work gloves. The brief respite in the car also brought a cold realization of reality. He wasn't prepared for this. Their rental apartment was tiny. The divorce had drained him of both energy and funds. He worked 2 jobs. A day shift as an HVAC technician and a night gig doing freelance web design. Chloe was in college, and any unexpected expense would punch a hole in their meager budget. And a large dog like a Malamute. In this weakened state, this wasn't just responsibility. It was a massive expense and a risk of being evicted. Switching on the flashlight, he found what he needed, the heavy bolt cutters. Cold metal in hand, Chris glanced back at the dark shadow beyond the thicket where Chloe sat. Holding the dog, she hadn't moved an inch. The image was strangely unwavering. This wasn't just an emotional impulse, it was a desperate plea from his only daughter. He stepped back out into the extreme cold. "I'm doing it now," he told Chloe, his voice muffled. "I'll handle this." He knelt beside the dog they still hadn't named. The dog rested its head on Chloe's wet lap, occasionally lifting its worried black eyes toward Chris. "Hey, buddy, you're a big one," Chris whispered, carefully locating the cable. Though short, the link attached to the collar was old and rusty. Whoever had abandoned him had intended for no easy rescue. The link was seized up. The cold metal of the cable was buried deep in the thick fur around the neck. Its shortness was a slow torture, preventing the dog from comfortably stretching out. Chris placed the bolt cutters over the link closest to the tree. "Hold him tight, Chloe. He might be startled by the noise." Chloe hugged the dog even harder, leaning against its thick side. "It's okay, boy, just a little snap," she whispered into his triangular ear. Chris exerted all his force. The metal groaned, and a second later, a dry, sharp crack echoed. The dog flinched violently. A flicker of terror crossed its eyes, and it tried to bolt. But Chloe held him fast. It's done. It's over. The cable fell onto the snow. Only the freed collar remained around his neck. The dog lay motionless, as if unable to believe its liberation. It watched Chris with labored breathing. All right, that's it. Come on. We need to warm you up. Chris unfastened the large, warm flannel scarf his mother had knitted, wrapping it around the dog's neck over the collar. But the dog didn't move, it lay still. He can't stand up, Chloe said, rising. Her legs were numb from sitting so long in the snow. Chris slid his arms beneath the dog's belly. He's exhausted, Chloe, and severely hypothermic. That thick fur helped, but the cold beat him. Then we'll carry him. Chloe was resolute. He must be close to 100 pounds. Chris laughed weakly, but seeing his daughter's serious expression, he immediately stopped. He knew she meant it. They lifted the dog together. His body was heavy as lead, his limbs limp, supporting his chest and hindquarters. They trudged slowly through the deep snow. The Malamute offered no resistance, completely surrendering. His large, heavy head rested on Chloe's shoulder. The walk back to the car seemed to take forever. At the car, Chris opened the rear door. We'll put him in the back seat. It's leather. We can wipe it down. They carefully placed the dog on the seat. The Malamute curled up, shaking, trying to press his body against the warm cushion. Chris slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and cranked the heater to maximum. Warm air began to flow through the cabin, bringing with it humidity, cold, and another powerful scent from the wet fur, the smell of terror. Dad, what are we going to name him? Chloe asked softly, never taking her eyes off the dog. Chris glanced at the rearview mirror. The dog's eyes were closed, his fiery golden-red coat trembling with each labored breath. Chris replied. He's a strong one. Survived that blizzard. How about Blizzard? Chloe stroked the large head. We found him after the worst of the storm. Blizzard, Chris repeated, strong like his body, harsh like the night they found him. It was the perfect name. He slowly pulled the car away. What are you going to tell the landlord? The question weighed heavily, but Chris knew there was no going back. Looking at the quiet, faithful light of hope in those trusting Malamute eyes, he knew he couldn't take him to a shelter, couldn't abandon him a second time. Nothing, Chris answered, gripping the steering wheel. Not until we find a solution. But he knew he was lying. He was already figuring out how he could afford to keep this dog. We should take him to the vet tomorrow. Tomorrow's Saturday, Chloe said. The clinic will be open. Prepare yourself, Chloe. Vets' bills for a large breed like this are expensive. Very expensive. We'll have to make more sacrifices. I'll work, Chloe said instantly. I'll find a part-time job. I'll walk him, please. He needs us. Chris looked at his daughter and realized Blizzard wasn't the only one who needed the rescue. He needed it, too. He, who had forgotten unconditional trust and become accustomed to living in cold calculation and solitude. He suddenly realized that the look in the Malamute's eyes made him feel important. Not just as an ATM or a driver, but as a savior. Okay, Chris said, Blizzard it is, and this is our secret. They arrived at the apartment parking lot around 8 p.m. Chris cut the engine. All right, this is the hard part, he said. Up we go. They lifted Blizzard's heavy body together again. The dog was too weak even to stand on the asphalt. He was limp in their arms. Like a giant, broken stuffed animal, Chris opened the communal entrance door. Hold his head, Chloe. Don't let him bump anything. They climbed 3 flights of stairs. The climb was agonizing, but no one complained. The only thing that mattered was the heavy, rhythmic breathing between the two people carrying their uninvited guest. Stepping into the apartment, warm air rushed over their faces. Blizzard shivered again at the temperature change. But this time, it seemed like a tremor of relief. The intense smell of wet fur and cold earth quickly filled the small, warm apartment. Chris quickly carried Blizzard to the living room, near the small electric stove, and gently lowered him onto the floor. The dog curled up again, resting his nose on his forepaws. All right now. Chris's movements were sharp and purposeful. He pulled an old flannel picnic blanket from the closet and spread it right next to the stove. Chloe, Get me some lukewarm water. Not hot, just slightly warm. We need to wipe him down. While Chloe ran to the kitchen, Chris carefully unbuckled the collar. It was high-quality leather, but there was no tag or address on the back. Let's take this off. Give your neck a rest, he murmured. With the collar removed, he saw a red mark on the skin beneath the thick fur. It wasn't from the chain, but from prolonged pressure. The collar had likely grown too tight as the dog matured. When he gently stroked the injured skin, the dog let out a small whine but made no attempt to bite, the strongest evidence that this was a gentle family dog, simply betrayed. Chloe returned with a large towel and a basin of lukewarm water. She carefully wiped Blizzard's large paws, stiff with cold and grime. Dad, look, her finger touched a paw pad. The thick, black pads were faded, stiff, and covered with a thin film of ice. Frostbite, Chris concluded, hopefully not deep. Vet first thing in the morning. While Chloe tended to the paws, Chris brought leftover chicken from the fridge, what they were supposed to eat for dinner, and some bread soaked in warm water. He placed 2 bowls in front of the dog. Blizzard lifted his head, his eyes fixed on the bowls. He began to crawl toward the water bowl, drinking greedily with loud gulps, as if afraid the water would disappear. After a minute, he finally pulled away, let out a heavy sigh, and looked at the food bowl. He didn't leap at it with the vulgar greed of a starving dog. He slowly and carefully picked up a small piece of chicken. There was no unseemly gluttony, only the wariness born of self-respect, mingled with the fear that this might be a dream. Good boy, Chloe stroked his thick back. Blizzard ate everything, but slowly, glancing occasionally at Chris. This caution was more painful than a growl. After eating, the dog lay down on the blanket by the stove. The warmth completely melted the ice in his thick fur, and the intense smell of wet dog filled the room. Chris cracked a window slightly for ventilation, careful not to let Blizzard get cold again. Well, first night, Chris said. His body was leaden with fatigue. Chloe changed clothes after confirming the dog's breathing had become regular, a sign of relaxation. Chris sat in an armchair, trying to rest. A light scratching sound on the floor came from the hallway. He dozed for about an hour but was awakened by a low, necessary sound, a whimper. He got up and went to the hallway. Blizzard was not by the stove. He was sitting by the front door, his flank pressed against the doorframe, lightly scratching the linoleum floor with his claws, a small whine deep in his throat. Hey, what are you doing there? Chris knelt beside him. Blizzard was startled but didn't back away. He kept staring at the door. There was no aggression in his eyes, only a heartbreaking expectation. Chris understood. Blizzard wasn't sleeping. He was waiting for the original owner who drove him away and abandoned him to return. Waiting for the door to open and for them to say, it was a joke. The absolute loyalty of the Malamute, famous worldwide as a one-master dog, squeezed his heart with cold dread. No, buddy, Chris said quietly. He's not coming back, and we are not opening this door. He tried gently pulling the dog back toward the blanket. Blizzard resisted, planting his feet firmly on the floor. It's warmer over there, Chris pleaded, but then he gave up. He couldn't use force on an animal that had just experienced such betrayal. Chris returned to the living room, grabbed his coat and an old cushion, and lay down on the floor right next to Blizzard, just by the door. The floor was cold, but he didn't care. Okay, you want to sit here? Then we'll sit here together, he said. He lay on his side, placing a hand on the dog's broad chest, feeling the heart beating beneath the thick fur. The beat was irregular, with strange pauses. The clock ticked. Chloe emerged from her room, saw the scene, and without a word, brought another blanket for Chris. She left her door slightly ajar so she could hear. Chris lay there, feeling the cold seeping into his shoulder from the floor. He stroked Blizzard gently, with a steady rhythm, trying to convey the message. I am here. I'm not going anywhere. What Blizzard needed now wasn't food. He needed the guarantee that he wouldn't be abandoned again. The quiet battle between the animal's hope for the past and the human's promise for the future became the center of that night. It wasn't until 3 hours later that Blizzard stopped whimpering. His breathing slowed. First, his jaw rested on his forepaws. And then, With a tired sigh, his large, heavy head rested on Chris's thigh. He was asleep, a nightmare-filled sleep. His legs twitched sometimes, as if running from something. But the nose pressed into Chris's warm leg was calm. Chris didn't sleep. He watched the sleeping Malamute, his beautifully strong skull, and his jowls where the ice was beginning to melt. In that moment, he understood. This was no longer a rescue dog. He was part of their lives. As morning dawned and a gray light filtered through the window, Chris finally felt his eyelids grow heavy. He tried to shift gently, but Blizzard sensed the movement and slightly opened his eyes. "Sleep, boy," Chris whispered. Then the unexpected happened. Blizzard closed his eyes again, seemingly certain that this new master wouldn't vanish, and pressed his cheek even harder into Chris's lap. Chris fell asleep, listening to the strong, pulsing heart beneath his hand. The last thing he smelled was the intense dog odor mingled with the old blanket. He hadn't just picked up a dog in a wasteland. He had picked up its pain and its absolute trust. And now, that trust was his. Chloe woke up at 7 a.m. Her first sensation the chill coming from the floor. She reached out and turned on the light, and gasped at the sight. Her father, the reserved and fiercely self-disciplined Chris, was curled up on the hallway floor in an old flannel blanket, pressed tightly against his hip. Blizzard slept soundly. The large Malamute, tethered for 4 days, now rested his heavy head on the back of Chris's knee, sleeping peacefully. His breathing was deep and regular. Unlike last night, he was no longer trembling. Chloe stood silently. She knew Blizzard hadn't slept by the stove. She had heard his whimpering last night. But she never imagined her father would spend the entire night on the floor just to reassure an abandoned animal. This small, silent action spoke volumes about the man her father was. She quietly went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. When Chris woke up, his body was numb. He opened his eyes, and a few inches away was Blizzard's fox-like face. The dog was looking at him. There was no anxiety in his eyes like yesterday, only a serious gaze. "What is it, buddy?" Chris said in a raspy voice. "No crying today?" In response, Blizzard gave a faint, characteristic wag of his tail. It was the highest reward. "Dad, coffee?" Chloe stood there with a coffee cup. "Why didn't you wake me?" Chris rose with difficulty. "You looked comfortable." She smiled proudly. "Blizzard woke up 10 minutes ago. He's been quietly waiting for you to wake up." Chris looked at the dog, confirming Chloe's words. Blizzard followed Chris into the living room and lay down there, but kept his eyes wide open, watching every move of his new master. "Today is Saturday. We're going to the vet right now." They hurried to get ready. Chris attached a sturdy nylon leash to Blizzard's neck. The dog still dragged his hind legs. The veterinary clinic, located in the University District, was bright but smelled strongly of medicine and the fear of other animals. Blizzard was tense. He stayed pressed close to Chris's leg. There was a strange calmness characteristic of the Malamute breed. No barking, no panic, just quiet observation, seeking a safe anchor. Dr. Sarah Stone, a kind but tired-looking woman in her 40s, received them. The examination took a long time. Blizzard endured everything. His stomach was palpated, his teeth checked, without resistance. "He's about 3 to 4 years old," Dr. Stone said, writing on her chart. "A purebred Alaskan Malamute, genetically excellent. Look at this bone structure and head shape. He was probably very expensive once." Then she moved to the critical findings: severe hypothermia and dehydration. "He needs an IV immediately. His paws have early-stage frostbite. But thanks to that thick double coat, we avoided serious internal organ damage." Chloe held her hands tightly. "What about his back legs?" "He's dragging them." Dr. Stone gently manipulated the hind legs. Blizzard whimpered. "An old injury, a fracture. It healed naturally, but the joint is misaligned. He might need surgery later. And most importantly, his heart. He has an arrhythmia from the stress and the cold. One more day outside, and we would have lost him." "What do we need to do?" Chris asked. "IVs, antibiotics, pain meds. He needs at least 3 days of hospitalization." Dr. Stone showed the cost. It was a staggering amount. It was equivalent to half of Chris's monthly salary. Chris fell silent for a moment, the numbers spinning in his head. But then he looked at Blizzard, who lay on the cold metal examination table, entrusting his fate to him with absolute faith. He knew he couldn't refuse. Do everything necessary, please. Chris nodded. Dr. Stone smiled. You are a good man. Chris crouched beside Blizzard. You'll be here a little while. Boy, I'll come get you, I promise. Blizzard licked Chris's hand weakly, but trustingly. The 3 days at the clinic felt endless. Every day at 6 p.m. sharp, Chris and Chloe came to visit, but Blizzard's mental state deteriorated. His body was clean and warm, but he refused to eat. He only drinks water after you leave, Dr. Stone explained. He sniffs the food and turns away. He's giving up on life. He thinks you abandoned him, too, just like his previous owner. Malamutes are extremely sensitive and proud. He is trying to destroy himself out of grief. The words pierced Chris's heart. Chloe couldn't bear it and knelt beside Chris. Blizzard, please don't die. You're not just a dog. You're family. We have your blanket and your bowls at home. You have to fight. Chris also knelt, placing both hands on the dog's back, sending warmth through the fiery golden red fur. You're a warrior, Blizzard. You survived the storm. I swear on my honor, I will never abandon you. You are my dog now. The motionless Blizzard suddenly and slowly lifted his undamaged forepaw and placed it on Chris's hand. A light touch, a single reply. That night, after they went home, Blizzard started eating. A week later, Chris went to pick up Blizzard. The dog was completely transformed. His golden red coat shone brightly, and the fire of intelligence was back in his eyes. He still dragged his hind leg, but his walk carried the inherent dignity of a noble breed. Back home, Blizzard went straight to the living room, sniffed his old blanket, and threw himself down with a satisfied sigh. He was home. Their life changed. Blizzard was obsessively devoted to Chris. He followed him everywhere. When Chris worked, he lay at his feet. When he slept, Blizzard watched over him. It was the one master trait of the breed. He accepted Chloe and played with her, but Chris was the center of his universe. He still had fears. The sound of clanging metal made him hide under the table, likely in association with the cable or being struck by a key or chain. Chris patiently and gradually exposed him to the sound, until eventually, the jingle of keys meant wagging his tail and welcoming Chris home. By March, Blizzard was healthy, his muscles defined. He walked beside Chris like a silent, wary bodyguard. One sunny morning during a walk, Blizzard suddenly stopped in front of an older, dark blue-black sedan. He shrank back, shaking violently, his eyes wide with terror. Chris realized it was a similar car to the one that had taken him to be dumped. It took Chris and Chloe great effort to pull him out of the panic. Chris's anxiety became reality with a call from Dr. Stone. A man came to the clinic looking for a golden red Malamute that went missing. He has papers. He says the dog is an inheritance and wants him back. What does he want? Chris asked, his hand trembling. He has the paperwork. He said the dog is a legacy. Be careful, Mr. Stone. He's not looking for him out of affection. He knows the value of this breed. Chris immediately went on guard. They changed their walking times and avoided busy areas. But the man found them anyway. Late one evening, the man blocked their path. He was a well-dressed middle-aged man, looking at Blizzard with a cold, calculating gaze. Found you at last, the man said with a dismissive tone. My valuable dog. Blizzard hid at Chris's feet, whimpering softly. Chris stepped in front of the dog. This dog is mine. The man sneered. He's a purebred Malamute. I have all the papers. I inherited him from my aunt, but he was too much trouble, so I let him run free. But now I hear he's alive and well-fed. I'll take him back, or you pay me. You tried to kill him, and now you want money? Chris roared. He's my property. Chloe emerged from the shadows, holding up her smartphone. I recorded everything. You just admitted you abandoned him. The man flew into a rage, lunging toward Chloe. Chris's paternal instinct flared. He grabbed the man's collar and shoved him against the wall. But at that moment, Blizzard changed. The frightened animal was gone, replaced by the Malamute's protective instinct as a guard dog. Blizzard leapt up, his fur bristling, letting out a low, terrifying growl from deep within his chest. His teeth were bared, ready to tear the attacker apart. The man, faced with the furious golden monster, went pale with fear. He spat out threats and hastily backed away, running off. The next morning, with the help of a volunteer lawyer, Chloe's recording, and the vet's medical report proving the former owner's cruelty, the police were involved. The man was not only denied the dog but was charged with animal cruelty. Blizzard's ownership was formally transferred to Chris. The story ends on a sunny May day by Riverside. Blizzard, now a free and proud dog, plunged into the cold water. He splashed, barking joyously, a cry of pure, unadulterated happiness. Chris put his arm around his daughter's shoulder, watching the golden-red Malamute shimmer like a living ingot in the sun. "We saved him, Dad," Chloe said. "No," Chris smiled. "He saved us." Blizzard looked back, barked a loud, inviting sound, and ran forward again, certain that his family was following close behind.